The invitation. The victory over the Volkov syndicate had been a declaration, but in the world of shadows, declarations are invitations. Geraldine understood this with the bone-deep certainty of a woman raised in a house where every triumph was measured by the retaliation it would provoke. The Volkovs had been crushed, their operations in the Pacific Northwest dismantled, their leadership scattered. But the chessboard of organized crime did not tolerate empty squares. Someone would always move to fill the space. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier rather than post. It was cream cardstock, so thick it felt like vellum, embossed with the Colorado state seal in silver foil. Geraldine turned it over in her manicured fingers, reading the elegant script once, then again. The Colorado Unity Gala. Hosted by Lieutenant Governor Soren Voss. Black tie. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel. 3 weeks hence. She set the card down on the polished surface of her desk and allowed herself a slow, appraising smile. The timing was precise, almost surgical. The Volkov fallout was still settling, the ripples of their destruction spreading through the underworld like concentric rings in dark water. Someone wanted to see the new power structure up close. Someone wanted to measure her. Anything interesting? She looked up to find Thalen standing in the doorway of her study, his broad shoulders filling the frame with practiced ease. He had been reviewing the security footage from the previous night's shipment transfer, but his instincts had clearly pulled him from the task. He always knew when something required his attention. "The lieutenant governor wants to play host," Geraldine said, holding up the card. "A gala. All the right people. All the wrong reasons." Thalen crossed the room, his footsteps silent despite his size. He took the invitation from her fingers, his thumb tracing the embossed seal with the same careful attention he gave to weapons inspection. Up close, the lines of his face were carved from granite and shadow, the kind of face that belonged on a wanted poster or a memorial wall, depending on which side of the law you inhabited. "Voss," he said, the name flat and without inflection. "Ambitious. Clean public image. Rumored to have his fingers in half the development contracts in the Front Range." "And the other half?" Geraldine asked, leaning back in her chair. "Those belong to people who don't want their names on paper." She nodded, pleased with his assessment. Thalen's intelligence was one of the reasons she had chosen him, cultivated him, made him indispensable. He saw the shape of things before others even recognized the pieces on the board. "The gala is a necessary audit," she said, rising from her chair and moving to the window. Her study overlooked the Denver skyline, the Rocky Mountains a jagged silhouette against the pale afternoon sky. Voss is positioning himself for higher office. The governor's seat, perhaps. He'll be courting anyone with money and influence. The fact that he extended an invitation to me suggests he's aware of my interests. Or he wants to know if you're a threat to his plans. Either way, attendance is mandatory. Absence would be its own statement, and I'm not ready to make that one yet. She turned from the window, studying Thalen as he studied the invitation. He was a study in contained force, the kind of man who could stand perfectly still and still project an almost palpable sense of danger. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his jaw clean-shaven, but nothing could disguise the predatory awareness that lurked beneath his carefully maintained composure. "I want you there," she said. "Close. Watching. I never leave your side at these events. You know what I mean. Not just proximity. I want you to see what I can't, notice what others miss." Voss will have his own security, and they'll be trained to spot threats to him. I need someone who spots threats to me. Thalen's eyes, the color of a winter sea, met hers with unwavering focus. "I'll make the arrangements. The Metropolitan will need a full assessment. Do it quietly. I don't want Voss's people knowing I'm conducting my own reconnaissance." "Of course." He tucked the invitation into his jacket pocket with the same care he gave to everything. "I'll have a preliminary report on the venue by Friday." He turned to leave, and Geraldine watched him go. She had seen that particular walk, purposeful, unhurried, and utterly confident, do everything from command soldiers in the field to bring down men twice his size. Thalen was a weapon she had forged, and like any weapon, he required maintenance, attention, and the occasional sharpening. But he also required trust. That was the delicate part. She had given him access to her life in ways she had never given anyone, and she had done so deliberately. In her world, intimacy was currency, and every exchange had to be calculated. Yet there were moments, they were brief, unguarded instants, when she wondered if the calculation had become something else entirely. She dismissed the thought and returned to her desk. The gala would require more than just Thalen's security assessment. It would require armor, the right dress, the right jewels. A reminder to everyone in that room that Geraldine McDonald was not merely attending, she was judging. The 3 weeks leading to the gala passed in a blur of preparation. Thalen delivered his venue assessment with the clinical precision she had come to expect. 2 main entrances for service exits, a ballroom with sightlines compromised by the grand columns, but open enough for crowd surveillance. He had identified the security personnel, including both uniformed and plainclothes. He also noted the gaps in their coverage. Adequate for a politician, he concluded, standing before her desk with his tablet in hand. Inadequate for our purposes. Then we supplement their inadequacy, Geraldine replied. I want 2 of our people inside, wearing the caterer's uniform, and 1 stationed at the loading dock. Lars will handle the car. I'll have a secondary vehicle positioned on the east side of the hotel, just in case we need to exit through the kitchen. You anticipate needing to exit through the kitchen? Thalen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I anticipate that if I prepare for the worst, I'm never surprised when it arrives. She smiled, a slow curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. That's why I keep you. The dress arrived 3 days before the gala, delivered in a flat black box tied with gray silk ribbon. Geraldine opened it alone, in the privacy of her dressing room, and let her fingers trail over the fabric. Liquid obsidian, the color of deep space, the texture of water made solid. The gown was a daring V in the back, held together by a whisper of fabric and sheer will. The front was more modest, a clean column that would flow like ink as she walked. She had chosen it carefully. The gala was a theater, and in theater, costume was everything. The exposed back was a statement. I have nothing to hide. I fear no knife in the dark. The simplicity of the cut said power, not ostentation. She needed these people to see her as a force, not a curiosity. Thalen saw the dress for the first time the evening of the gala when he arrived to escort her to the car. Geraldine descended the stairs with deliberate grace, her heels silent on the thick runner carpet, the gown pooling around her like captured night. The sapphire ring was her only jewel, a blue star against the darkness of the dress, a pointed reminder of her connection to power that predated Colorado, predated the Rocky Mountain foothold, predated all of them. Thalen's reaction was almost imperceptible. It was a fractional pause in his breathing, a slight shift in his posture. But Geraldine had been reading him for years, and she caught every nuance. You approve? She asked, reaching the bottom of the stairs. You'll be the most dangerous woman in the room, he replied. It wasn't flattery. It was simple, unadorned fact. And you? He was dressed in a tuxedo that had been tailored within an inch of its life, the charcoal wool cut to accommodate the breadth of his shoulders without sacrificing elegance. But nothing could disguise the slight, deliberate bulk of the custom Kevlar vest beneath his shirt, or the way the fabric stretched across his chest as he moved. I'll be the man in the corner, who looks like he belongs at the bar, he said. No one will remember my face. Geraldine laughed. It was a genuine sound, rare and precious. They will remember the man who never left my side. That's the point. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel rose from the Denver streets like a monument to old money and new ambition, its Beaux-Arts facade illuminated by strategically placed lights that emphasized its grandeur while hiding its age. Geraldine had visited the hotel before, but never for an event of this scale. The lobby alone could have housed a small cathedral, all marble and crystal and the soft, insistent hum of wealth. She and Thalen moved through the crowd like 2 stones dropped into still water, the ripples of their passage marked by curious glances and whispered speculation. Geraldine had been in Denver long enough to be known, but not long enough to be understood. The city's old guard was still deciding what to make of her. She was the heir to a crime dynasty, the woman who had quietly upended the established order, the uncertain quantity in a world that preferred predictable power. The ballroom was a jewel box of murmured deals and false laughter. Crystal chandeliers cast 1,000 points of light onto the assembled guests, their brilliance offset by the warm glow of candles flickering on every table. The air was thick with a mingled sense of expensive perfume, fine champagne, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Geraldine moved through it like a shark through warm water. She was graceful, inevitable, and utterly without fear. She smiled when a smile was required, nodded when a nod was expected, and watched. Always watched. Soren Voss found her 20 minutes into the cocktail hour, his smile as polished as the silver trays carried by the circulating servers. He was a handsome man in his early 50s, with a politician's easy charm and a predator's calculating gaze. The combination had served him well, propelling him from state legislature to the lieutenant governor's office with a speed that raised eyebrows and questions. "Geraldine McDonald Remington," he said, extending his hand with practiced warmth. "I was so pleased when you accepted my invitation. I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." "Lieutenant Governor," she replied, taking his hand. His grip was firm, dry, the grip of a man who had shaken many hands and would shake many more. "Your invitation was impossible to refuse. The gala is absolutely stunning." "Thank you. It's taken months to organize, but I believe in doing things well or not at all." He released her hand and gestured to the room at large. "Colorado deserves events of this caliber. We're not just a flyover state anymore. We're the future." "Future of what, precisely?" His smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. "Of industry, of innovation, of governance that actually works for the people." "Charming sentiment," Geraldine said. "The people I speak with rarely use the word governance without a great deal of profanity." Voss laughed, the sound carefully calibrated to suggest shared amusement rather than offense. "You speak with a different class of people than I do, I suspect." "I suspect we speak with the same class of people, Lieutenant Governor. We simply want different things from them." The conversation continued in that vein, polished barbs wrapped in silk, the kind of verbal fencing that Geraldine had been trained for since childhood. Voss was an opponent worth respecting, and she gave him the respect of full attention. But behind her pleasant smile, she was cataloging everything: the tightness around his eyes when certain topics arose, the way his hand tightened fractionally on his champagne flute when she mentioned development contracts, the quick glance he cast toward the table where his aide sat watching. Thalen, meanwhile, had positioned himself at the bar, his back to the wall, his eyes moving with slow, methodical precision across the room. He was the perfect accessory. He was the man who was present but not intrusive, the ghost at the feast. Geraldine made her way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with a senator, a tech billionaire, the wife of a defense contractor. She nodded coolly to Michael Rostov, a shipping magnate from her father's generation who controlled Pacific ports and moved goods, some legal, some otherwise, through a network that spanned 3 continents. "Geraldine," he said, his Russian accent still thick despite 40 years in America. "Your father would be proud." "I'd rather be feared than proud," she replied, "though I suspect the two are related in your experience." Rostov laughed, a sound like gravel rolling downhill. "Your father said you were sharp. He didn't say you were dangerous. Some lessons are best learned in person." "Indeed." He studied her with the appraising eyes of a man who had survived decades in their world. "The Volkovs made a mistake. They thought you were weak because you were young and because you were a woman. They forgot that the apple rarely falls far from the tree." "The tree has deep roots," Geraldine agreed. "And the apple has teeth." Rostov smiled and raised his glass in a small toast. "I'll remember that." She moved on, leaving Rostov to his champagne and his calculations. The old guard was watching her, measuring her, trying to decide if she was an asset or a threat. She was both, of course. That was the point. The string quartet began their second set as the dinner service concluded. The music was mournful and classical, the kind of piece that made the wealthy feel cultured while their minds wandered to deals and alliances. Geraldine had been seated at the head table, a position of honor that was also a position of scrutiny. She ate sparingly, drank minimally, and continued to watch. Thalen had shifted position during dinner, moving from the bar to a spot near the main columns that supported the ballroom's vaulted ceiling. From there, he could see the entrances and exits, the flow of the servers, the subtle shifts in the crowd. Geraldine could feel his attention like a physical presence, a weight against her awareness that she had grown to trust as much as her own instincts. It was during the quartet's third piece, Something by Shostakovich, dark and restless, that she saw Thalen's posture change. It was a minuscule shift, barely a millimeter in his shoulders, but she had been studying him for years. She knew the language of his body better than she knew any other. Something had caught his attention. She followed his line of sight without turning her head, letting her gaze drift across the crowd as if she were simply surveying the room. A server was moving against the grain of the crowd, his silver tray bearing a single, untouched champagne flute. His path was too direct, his bearing too focused. The other servers wove through the guests with practiced deference, their eyes averted, their bodies angled to avoid contact. This one moved like a blade through silk. It was straight, purposeful, and utterly without apology. Thalen was already in motion, his body uncoiling from the column with the fluid power of a predator recognizing prey. Geraldine saw it happen in the space between heartbeats, the sudden acceleration, the brutal arc of his arm as he smashed the tray upward, the crystal flute soaring to shatter against the column. Then, impossibly, the shot. It was soft, almost subliminal, just a muffled pft of compressed air that might have been mistaken for a cork or the pop of a champagne bottle. But Geraldine knew the sound of a weapon, knew it the way she knew the scent of cordite and the weight of a bullet in her hand. Thalen took the shot in the chest, high on the right side, directly over his heart. The impact drove him back a step, the force of it slamming him into her with enough power to make her stumble. She felt the shock travel through his body, heard the sickening crack of ribs giving way, tasted the copper edge of blood in the air. Down, he gritted out, shoving her toward the cover of a massive marble pillar. His voice was ragged, a command that barely escaped through clenched teeth. Chaos erupted around them. It wasn't the screaming, running chaos of a panicked crowd, but something more civilized and somehow more frightening. A woman's champagne flute dropped, the crystal shattering on the marble floor. A muted gasp rippled through the inner circle. The music stopped, the quartet frozen mid-note, their instruments raised like weapons they didn't know how to use. The server, the assassin, stood frozen in the aftermath of his failed attempt. His weapon was exposed now, a sleek matte-black device that was already being lowered. He had one chance, one fatal second of hesitation, his mission compromised by the unexpected intervention. Geraldine whirled from behind the pillar, her eyes finding the assassin in the same instant Thalen's body turned to shield her. She saw the weapon, the recognition in the man's eyes, the chilling smile that touched his lips as security finally surged forward. It was Voss's private detail, a wave of black suits converging on the killer. The man didn't fight. He dropped the weapon and raised his hands, allowing himself to be tackled to the ground. The message was sent. The attempt was the point. "Can you walk?" Thalen growled, his arm around her, fingers digging into the black silk at her waist. She could feel the tension in his grip, the barely controlled pain behind the words.
"Yes."
"You're hit. Armor caught it. Ribs are broken.
"Go. Now."
He propelled her through the retreating crowd, using his body as a wedge against the panicked guests. Every jostle sent lightning through his torso. She could feel the flinch in his muscles, the way he swallowed against the copper taste in his throat. The ballroom was descending into a dignified stampede. The powerful of Colorado became a herd, rushing for doors, phones pressed to ears, the careful facade of civility crumbling into self-preservation. Geraldine let Thalen guide her, her hand pressed to his arm, her mind already spinning through the implications. Someone had tried to kill her. Someone had sent a message, and she would make certain the message was returned. They broke free into the cool night air of the porte cochere, the Grand Metropolitan's grand entrance framed by marble pillars and the blinking lights of waiting cars. Lars was already there, the SUV's engine running, his face a mask of professional concern. Thalen all but threw Geraldine into the back seat, collapsing in beside her with a groan that he tried and failed to suppress. The sound was raw, and like an animal, the sound of a man who had held himself together through sheer will and was now paying the price. "Go," he managed. "Safe house. Not the cabin." The world was tilting, the pain rising up to swallow him. Geraldine caught his head as it lolled, cradling him against her shoulder, her fingers pressing against his jaw to keep his airway open. The sapphire ring gleamed in the dim light of the car, a cold blue star against the darkness of his skin. "Stay with me," she said, her voice low and fierce. "You don't get to leave me. Not like this. Not ever." His eyes flickered toward her, the winter sea of his gaze unfocused, but still searching. "Your dress," he breathed. "It's ruined. Despite everything, all the terror, the fury, the cold realization that the world had just shifted beneath her feet." Geraldine laughed. It was a choked sound, half sob and half something else entirely, but it was real. "Fuck the dress," she said, pressing her lips to his temple. "Stay with me." The SUV roared away from the hotel, leaving the chaos and the cameras and the carefully orchestrated disaster behind. The night stretched ahead of them, dark and uncertain, and Geraldine held Thalen against her chest and felt the steady beat of his heart against her palms and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what she would do to the people who had dared to threaten him. It was a long, terrible list, and she had all the time in the world to complete it. The Grand Metropolitan. The safe house was a penthouse in a building that didn't officially exist, on a street that had been rezoned 3 times in the past decade. It was Geraldine's preference for such occasions. It was anonymous, untraceable, and equipped with everything necessary for survival and extraction. The elevator required a keycard that changed codes every 12 hours, and the hallway cameras were routed through server in a country that had no extradition treaty with the United States. Thalen was barely conscious when Lars and one of the security team carried him through the door. Geraldine followed, the obsidian gown now smeared with blood and dust from the ballroom floor, the sapphire ring still bright on her finger. She watched as they laid him on the leather sofa, watched as one of her people, he was a former combat medic named Reyes, began the assessment. 3 ribs, possibly 4, Reyes said, his fingers gentle but professional against Thalen's chest. The vest caught the round, but the kinetic impact, there's bruising across the entire right side. He's going to have trouble breathing for a few days. Can we move him to a hospital?
No.
Thalen's voice was a dry rasp, his eyes still closed. No hospitals. Too many questions. Geraldine crossed to the sofa, her heels discarded somewhere between the elevator and the door. She knelt beside him, her hand finding his, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "Reyes can stabilize you here," she said. "But if his assessment changes, we go to the private clinic. I won't lose you because of pride." "Not pride," Thalen managed, cracking one eye open. "Security." The shooter was too clean, too precise. He knew exactly where to place himself, exactly how to move. Someone spent time planning this. They'll have eyes on the hospitals. Then we'll use the clinic's underground entrance. She squeezed his hand. "But we'll discuss it after Reyes finishes. Let him work." Reyes administered a local anesthetic and began the process of taping the fractured ribs, his movements efficient and detached. Geraldine watched from a chair she had pulled to the side of the sofa, her eyes never leaving Thalen's face. She had seen him injured before, had watched him take bullets and knife wounds, and the kind of blunt force trauma that would have killed a lesser man. But this was different. This had been meant for her. "You should change," Thalen said, his voice a little stronger now that the anesthetic was taking effect. "The dress is, you can't be seen like this." "I have 4 hours before anyone expects me to make a statement," she replied. "I'll change when I'm ready." "Geraldine, don't argue with me, Thalen. You just took a bullet for me. You don't get to dictate my wardrobe choices for the next 6 hours. Something flickered in his eyes. It was amusement, or the ghost of it. 6 hours. That's when I'll be done with the preliminary investigation. You'll still be taped to this sofa, and I'll still be wearing this dress. She leaned forward, her voice softening. The dress can wait. The questions can't. Reyes finished his work and stepped back, his professional assessment complete.
He needs rest.
No movement for at least 48 hours. The ribs will heal, but the bruising is extensive. If he experiences any shortness of breath or sharp pain, call me immediately. Thank you, Reyes. Geraldine rose from the chair, her movements fluid despite the exhaustion that was beginning to creep into her bones. Lars will show you to one of the guest rooms. I want you on site until Thalen is mobile. Reyes nodded and gathered his equipment, following Lars out of the main room. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Geraldine alone with Thalen and the weight of what had just happened. The shooter, Thalen said, his eyes closed, his voice distant with exhaustion and medication. He was a professional. The way he moved, the way he positioned himself. He wasn't expecting me to intercept. Then he didn't know about you. Or he was told and didn't believe it. There are a lot of people in this world who think I'm just a pretty face. Geraldine laughed, a soft sound that was almost lost in the hum of the apartment's climate control. No one who's ever seen you in a fight thinks that. I was thinking of something else. She turned to look at him, one eyebrow raised. Pretty face. I have my moments. The medications are making you loquacious. The medications are making me honest. He opened his eyes, the winter sea of his gaze finding hers with startling clarity. You shouldn't be here. You should be in the other room, making calls, starting the investigation. You shouldn't be sitting on the floor watching me breathe. I'll start the investigation when I'm ready, Geraldine said, her voice flat. I have 4 hours before anyone expects a statement. I'll use them how I see fit. You don't need to stay. I know. She didn't move. Thalen watched her for a long time, something unreadable passing across his features. It wasn't quite surrender, not quite acceptance, but something in between. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. Geraldine was silent, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. The apartment was dark except for the single lamp beside the sofa, and the shadows painted strange patterns across her face. I'm thinking about who sent him, she said at last. I'm thinking about the timing. The Volkovs are gone, but their allies aren't. Their territory is being fought over by 3 separate factions right now. One of them might have decided to try a different tactic. The Volkovs were sloppy, Thalen said. Brutal, but sloppy. This wasn't sloppy.
No.
It was theater. She turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing with a cold fire that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with calculation. The shooter wasn't trying to get away. He was trying to make a statement. He dropped the weapon the moment security moved. He let himself be captured. Because he knew he'd be protected. A ghost. No identity, no associations, no trail. Exactly. Geraldine rose from the chair and began to pace, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Someone wanted to send a message, without risking exposure. They used a patsy who doesn't exist, a weapon that's untraceable, and a venue that guaranteed maximum exposure. There's something else, Thalen said, his voice a little stronger now. The gun. The way it was designed. It wasn't just a silenced pistol. It was a delivery system. Geraldine stopped pacing. Explain. Needle gun. Compressed air. The round that hit me was designed to break apart on impact. My vest stopped the penetration, but if it had reached skin. He trailed off, the implication clear. Toxin, Geraldine said. Something fast-acting. Something that would have killed me before anyone could react. Or paralyzed you. Or made you look like you'd had a stroke. The beauty of that kind of weapon is the ambiguity. A heart attack at a gala, an aneurysm, a seizure. No one would suspect poison. They'd assume medical emergency. Geraldine resumed pacing, her mind working through the implications. The O'Sullivan Syndicate uses methods like that. Clean, theatrical, and they always use a patsy to make the statement. They're known for it. Atlanta, Thalen said. Cale O'Sullivan. He's been expanding westward. He sees the Colorado foothold as the weak point. Because I'm a woman. Because you're not your father, Thalen corrected. He knew your father. He grew up hearing stories about the McDonald dynasty. But you're the first generation that has to prove itself without the weight of his name. Geraldine stopped pacing, her arms crossed over her chest. I've spent the past 3 years proving myself. The Volkovs are gone. The Seattle operation is mine. The Pacific ports are under my control. And yet O'Sullivan thinks you're the soft entry point. He's underestimating you, and that's a mistake he'll only make once. I want him to know, Geraldine said, her voice dropping to something cold and quiet. I want him to understand that the woman he underestimated is the last mistake his syndicate will ever make. Thalen tried to sit up, grimacing as the movement sent a spike of pain through his ribs. What are you planning? Lie back down, she said, crossing to the sofa and pressing a hand to his shoulder. You're not doing anyone any good by re-injuring yourself. He complied, but his eyes remained fixed on her face. Geraldine, what are you planning? She was silent for a long time, her hand still resting on his shoulder, the heat of his body seeping through the fabric of his shirt. I'm planning a sanction, she said at last. The O'Sullivan Syndicate made a statement tonight. I'm going to make one in return.
How?
I don't know yet. She withdrew her hand and stepped back from the sofa. That's what the next 4 hours are for. I need to understand who I'm dealing with, what their assets are, where they're vulnerable. Voss's people will have the shooter. They'll be questioning him now. They'll get nothing. He's a ghost, remember? No identity, no associations, no trail. She turned toward the door. The real investigation is elsewhere. The shooter was a means to an end. The real question is who hired him. And if it is O'Sullivan, then I'll find him. And I'll destroy him. She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. But I need information before I can do that. And I need you to recover, so I can deploy you. Her eyes lingered on his face, the sharp lines of his jaw, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint flush of pain that still colored his cheeks. Will you be all right? He asked. I'm always all right, Thalen. You know that. I know you're good at pretending. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. I'm not pretending. I'm strategizing. There's a difference. She left the room before he could respond, the door clicking shut behind her. Thalen lay in the dim light, staring at the ceiling, his mind turning over the implications of everything she'd said. Cale O'Sullivan. Atlanta. The westward expansion. It made a certain kind of sense. O'Sullivan was ambitious, ruthless, and accustomed to getting what he wanted. He'd been making noise about moving into the Rocky Mountain territory for the past year, but he'd been cautious. He was testing the waters, feeling out the opposition. The assassination attempt was an escalation, a signal that he was done waiting. But it was also a mistake. Thalen knew that with the certainty of a man who had spent years watching Geraldine dismantle her enemies piece by piece. The O'Sullivan Syndicate had just painted a target on their own back, and Thalen was going to be the one to pull the trigger. He closed his eyes and let the exhaustion take him, the medication pulling him down into a fitful sleep. The last thing he thought before the darkness claimed him was the image of Geraldine's face in the dim light. She was beautiful, remote, and utterly without mercy. She made the calls from the apartment's secondary office, a small room with no windows and soundproof walls. Geraldine had designed it herself. It was a space where nothing could be overheard, nothing could be traced, and nothing could be interrupted. The first call was to Alara Vance, who specialized in logistics and was currently stationed in Chicago. Tell me about the O'Sullivan Syndicate, Geraldine said, without preamble. Everything you know, everything you can find out. I want their assets, their leadership structure, their weak points. Alara's voice was sharp and focused. Cale O'Sullivan is the head. Took over from his father 5 years ago. He's consolidating power, moving into new territories. Seattle's on his radar, and Denver. Seattle is ours. Denver is ours. Tell O'Sullivan that. He might not believe you. There was a pause, and the rustle of papers. I'll have a preliminary dossier for you by morning. What's the timeline? I want to be ready to move within 6 weeks. Thalen needs to recover, and I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. And if we can't find a target, we'll make one. Geraldine's voice was flat and final. The sanction isn't optional, Alara. O'Sullivan made a statement tonight, and I'm going to respond in kind. Understood. I'll have the dossier ready by 6 a.m. The second call was to Silas Rook, a financial analyst with a genius for finding hidden accounts and a history of working for people who made the IRS look tame. Celtic Front Development, Geraldine said. It's a shell company. I need to know who's behind it, where the money's coming from, and how we can drain it. That's the O'Sullivan front, isn't it? Rook's voice was nasal, precise, the voice of a man who spent more time with spreadsheets than people. They've been using it for about 3 years, moving money through a series of accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. I want the accounts. I want the records. I want everything. Getting that information won't be cheap. Money isn't the issue. Discretion is. Understood. I'll have something for you in a week. Geraldine ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The investigation was beginning. The threads were starting to come together. But there was still one question she needed to answer. The most important question. Who had supplied the shooter? The assassin had been a ghost, with no identity, no past, no connections. But someone had recruited him, trained him, given him the weapon and the intel. Someone had to be the link. She made a third call, this one to a contact in the Denver Police Department's Intelligence Division. It was a man who owed her favors and had the access she needed. 2 hours ago, she said, there was an incident at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. A shooting. I need to know everything the police are going to find out. The investigation is being handled by the state, the contact said, his voice low. Voss's people are running the show. The shooter is in their custody. They'll find nothing, Geraldine said. He's a ghost. No identity, no trail, no connections. But I need to know who brought him in. Brought him in? You think someone in Denver was involved? I think someone in Denver made a mistake. Geraldine's voice was ice. And I'm going to find out who. The contact promised to look into it and ended the call. Geraldine sat in the silence of the soundproof room, staring at the blank wall opposite her. The minutes ticked by, measured by the soft hum of the air conditioning. 4 hours. She had promised herself 4 hours before she'd make a statement. 4 hours to gather information, plan her response, and decide how to proceed. But the first decision had already been made. The O'Sullivan Syndicate would pay if they were involved, and Geraldine would make sure that the world understood what happened to those who tried to threaten what was hers. The dawn was breaking over Denver when Geraldine finally emerged from the office. She had made 11 calls, assembled a preliminary dossier on the O'Sullivan Syndicate, and identified 3 potential targets for retaliation. Her gown was still stained, her hair was disheveled, and the sapphire ring was the only thing about her that gleamed. She made her way back to the main room, expecting to find Thalen still asleep on the sofa. Instead, she found him sitting up, a glass of water in his hand, his eyes fixed on the window. You should be resting, she said, crossing to the chair where she had left her tablet. I can't sleep. His voice was still rough, but the effects of the medication were fading. Too much to think about, such as... He turned to look at her, his gaze sharp despite the pain still written on his face. You were gone for 4 hours. I counted. Geraldine almost smiled. You were counting? While you were supposed to be sleeping? I told you. I can't sleep. And I wanted to know what you were planning. I was planning exactly what I told you. Information gathering, asset identification, threat assessment, and I have a preliminary dossier on Cale O'Sullivan. She sat down in the chair across from him, crossing her legs and leaning back. He's been expanding rapidly for the past 3 years, taking over smaller operations, absorbing them into his network. He has control of most of the Southeast, and he's looking for new territory. Which brings him to us. Geraldine nodded. He sees Colorado as a soft entry point. He thinks our foothold here is temporary, that we're just passing through on our way to somewhere else. He's wrong. He's very wrong. But he's not the only one who thinks that way. She leaned forward, her eyes bright. We've been operating in the shadows for too long, Thalen. We've been careful, cautious, and building our network without drawing attention. But O'Sullivan's attack proves that caution is now a liability. People see our silence as weakness. Then we break the silence. Exactly. She rose from the chair and crossed to the window, her back to him. We're going to make a statement. A statement so loud, so devastating, that no one will ever think of Colorado as a soft target again. And O'Sullivan? O'Sullivan is the message. She turned to face him, her silhouette framed by the gray light of the dawn. We're going to destroy him. Every asset, every ally, every foothold he has. When we're done, his empire won't just be wounded. It will be gone. Thalen studied her, his expression unreadable. That's a high-stakes play, Geraldine. O'Sullivan has been building his network for years. Taking him down won't be easy. I never said it would be easy. I said it would be done. She returned to her chair, sitting across from him with the intent focus of a hawk. But I can't do it without you. That's why you need to recover. That's why I'm going to give you time. How much time? 6 weeks. Alara is working on a dossier. Rook is finding the money. I'm going to identify the targets. And when you're healed, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. I'm going to send you into the dark. The dark. The mission, she said. It's going to be yours. The Sanction. That's what I'm calling it. A formal, final response to O'Sullivan's attack. And you're going to be the one who delivers it. Thalen's hand tightened on hers, his grip steady despite the injury that still shadowed his movements. You're sending me alone? I'm sending you because I trust you. You're the only person I can rely on to do what needs to be done. You're the only person I can trust to understand exactly what I want. And what do you want? Geraldine leaned forward, her face inches from his, her eyes blazing with a cold fire that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with power. I want them to feel the cold in their bones before they ever see you coming, she said. I want Cale O'Sullivan to understand that the woman he underestimated is the last mistake his syndicate will ever make. I want him to know that his empire is crumbling, that his allies are turning against him, that his money is disappearing. And then I want him dead. Her voice was flat and final. I want him nowhere. I want the world emptier for him. Thalen stared at her, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Then he released her hand and leaned back against the sofa, his eyes closing. 6 weeks, he said. Then I'm yours. Then you're mine, she agreed. But first, you need to rest. And I need to change out of this dress. She rose from the chair, pausing at the doorway to look back at him. He was already settling back against the sofa, his breathing evening out as the exhaustion finally began to overtake him. I mean it, Thalen, she said softly. I need you. I need you whole. I'll be whole, he murmured, already half asleep. I promise. Geraldine watched him for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. The dawn was growing brighter outside, painting the Denver skyline in shades of gold and rose, and somewhere in the city, the investigation was beginning. But Geraldine was already thinking about the next step. The O'Sullivan syndicate had made a mistake. It was a fatal one, and she was going to make sure they understood exactly how fatal it was. The hunt begins. The days following the gala fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and familiar. Foreign because Geraldine had never been confined to a safe house for this long, never been forced to conduct her business from a single location while the world outside continued to spin. Familiar because she had done this before, during and in the aftermath of the Volkov Syndicate conflict, in the quiet moments between wars when strategy demanded patience. She worked from the penthouse's secondary office, the soundproof room that had become her command center. Alara Vance's dossier arrived on schedule, a comprehensive breakdown of the O'Sullivan Syndicate structure, assets, and vulnerabilities. Silas Rook followed 3 days later with the financial records, tracing the money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts, and through it all, Thalen healed. Reyes had been correct about the recovery timeline. The fractured ribs required rest, careful movement, and the kind of patience that Thalen had never been particularly good at. Geraldine watched him chafe against the restrictions, his restless energy barely contained beneath the surface of his controlled composure. You need to rest, she said on the 4th morning, finding him standing at the window, his hand pressed against his bandaged chest. The dawn light painted his face in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the deep-set eyes that were fixed on the city below. I've been resting for 4 days, he replied, his voice still rougher than usual. I need to move. I need to work. Your body disagrees. My body is fine. Your body has 3 fractured ribs and severe bruising across the entire right side. She crossed to stand beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. Reyes said 6 weeks. It's been 4 days. I'm not going to wait 6 weeks to start planning. You won't have to. Planning begins now. Execution happens when you're healed. Thalen turned to look at her, his stormy sea eyes meeting her whiskey gold gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. What have you found? Geraldine allowed herself a small smile. He was always like this. He was the most impatient, driven, and unable to sit still type of man while there was work to be done. It was one of the things she valued most about him, and one of the things that made him so difficult to manage. Ilara's dossier arrived this morning, she said, leading him back to the main room. I'll share everything once I've had time to review it. But the preliminary assessment is promising. Promising how? She settled onto the leather sofa, gesturing for him to join her. He lowered himself carefully, the movement betraying the pain he was trying to hide. Geraldine watched him, her expression unreadable. O'Sullivan has been expanding rapidly, she said. Too rapidly. He's absorbed several smaller operations in the past 2 years, and he's stretched himself thin. His security network is robust, but it's also overextended. There are gaps. What kind of gaps? The kind we can exploit. She pulled up the dossier on her tablet, scrolling through the information. He has 4 primary lieutenants. Each one controls a different aspect of his operation. Shipping, distribution, finance, and enforcement. If we can disrupt even one of those pillars, the entire structure becomes unstable. Thalen nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the screen. Which one is the weak point? I'm still assessing. But finance is promising. Rook has identified several accounts that are vulnerable to disruption. If we can freeze his assets, cut off his cash flow, the rest of the operation will start to crumble. Financial warfare doesn't send the same message as a bullet.
No.
Geraldine's voice was cold and very cautious, but it softens the target. It makes him desperate, forces him to make mistakes. And then we strike. And then we strike. Thalen repeated, the words a promise. Who's going to be the one to strike? You are. I've already made that clear. I know. I'm asking about the specifics. What's the target? Geraldine set the tablet aside and leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on his face. I'm still deciding, but I have a few candidates. His operations manager, his security chief, or Cale himself. Cale O'Sullivan will be the most heavily guarded.
Yes. He's also the most symbolic.
Taking him out sends a message that can't be misinterpreted. You think that's the right play? I think it's the play that ends the threat permanently. She reached out, her hand finding his, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. But I won't make the decision until I have more information. And I won't send you in until you're ready. I'll be ready in 5 weeks. Then we'll execute in 5 weeks. She squeezed his hand. Until then, you rest. And I plan. The weeks passed with a deceptive slowness. Geraldine threw herself into the investigation, working 18-hour days from the penthouse's secondary office. She reviewed Ilara's dossier in exhaustive detail, cross-referencing it with Rook's financial records and her own intelligence network. Cale O'Sullivan, she learned, was a man of contradictions. He was ruthless in business, but sentimental about his family, maintaining close ties with his elderly mother and 2 younger sisters. He was a hands-on operator who personally approved every significant move his organization made, but he was also prone to paranoia, surrounding himself with layers of security that sometimes interfered with his ability to function. His operations manager, a man named Declan Byrne, handled the day-to-day running of the syndicate. Byrne was competent, loyal, and utterly predictable. He was the kind of man who followed orders without question and never deviated from the plan. His security chief, Liam O'Connell, was the opposite, cunning, creative, and deeply suspicious of anyone who wasn't part of the inner circle. The assassination attempt had been coordinated by O'Connell. Geraldine was certain of it. The ghost shooter, the meticulous planning, the theatrical reveal, all bore the hallmarks of a security chief who understood the power of psychological warfare. But O'Connell was also the weakest link. He was arrogant, overconfident, and convinced that his systems were impenetrable. He had never been tested by an adversary like Thalen. Geraldine smiled at the thought. O'Connell had no idea what was coming for him. She made her way to the main room, expecting to find Thalen resting on the sofa. Instead, she found him standing at the window, his shirt off, his bandaged chest exposed to the cool air. He had been doing his exercises. It was the careful, planned movements designed to maintain his strength without aggravating his injuries. "You're improving," she said, pausing in the doorway. He turned, and she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the sight of him. Even injured, even weakened by weeks of forced inactivity, he was a formidable presence. The scars on his chest and shoulders were visible in the dim light. It was a road map of violence survived. The most prominent, a roped line on his collarbone and a knot of tissue on his thigh, told stories she had never asked him to explain. "Reyes says I'm healing well," he replied. "Another 2 weeks and I'll be fully mobile. Another 2 weeks and we'll be ready to move." She crossed to where he stood, her hand rising to touch his chest. Her fingers traced the line of a scar, feather-light, barely touching his skin. "How do you feel?" "Frustrated. Impatient. Ready to be done with this." "I'm talking about the pain." He was silent, taking his time, his eyes fixed on her face. "It's manageable. The worst of it passed after the first week. Now it's just a dull ache. A reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of what I'm protecting." His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm flat against his chest. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath the warmth of his skin. "And what I'm willing to sacrifice to keep it." Geraldine felt something change in her chest. It was a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She had known Thalen for years, had watched him fight and bleed and kill on her behalf. But moments like this, when the mask slipped and the real man emerged, were rare and precious. "Reyes says you're healing," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "And I trust him. But I need you to be honest with me. Are you ready? Truly ready? Physically? Almost. Mentally? I've been ready since the night of the gala." His hand tightened on hers, his gaze unwavering. "I've been thinking about this for weeks. About O'Sullivan. About what he tried to do. About what he deserves." "What does he deserve?" "Everything that's coming for him. Every consequence. Every repercussion. Every moment of suffering. He tried to take you from me, Geraldine. He tried to end everything we've built together." His jaw tightened, the muscles tensing beneath the stubble. "I'm going to make him understand exactly what that mistake cost him." Geraldine studied him, cataloging the tension in his body, the fire in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice. This was what she had created, she realized. This was the weapon she had forged, honed, and sharpened over years of careful cultivation. And she loved him for it. The realization hit her with unexpected force. She had always known that she trusted him, valued him, and needed him. But love, that was a dangerous word in her world. Love was a vulnerability, an opening, a weakness that could be exploited. But watching him stand there, his body still marked by the violence he had endured on her behalf, his eyes blazing with a fury that mirrored her own, she couldn't deny the truth. She loved him, and that love was going to make the coming operation even more dangerous. "We'll move in 2 weeks," she said, stepping back from him. "Alara has identified the best target. His security chief, Liam O'Connell. He's arrogant, overconfident, and deeply involved in the operation. Taking him out will destabilize the entire organization." "Just O'Connell?" "O'Connell first. And then," she smiled, the expression cold and predatory. "We'll see how O'Sullivan responds. He'll either retreat, consolidate his power, or come for us directly. We'll be ready for any of those scenarios." "I've been ready for weeks," Thalen said. "I've been ready for the day you'd finally let me off the leash." "Off the leash?" She raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you see it?" "I see it as a mission. A purpose. The reason I'm here." He stepped closer, his hand rising to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You're the reason I'm here, Geraldine. You're my home, my belonging. And I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." The word hung between them. Belonging. It was the word he used to describe his relationship with her, the word that defined their bond. He had said it before, in moments of vulnerability, but it had never felt as charged as it did now. "You belong to me," she said, the words a statement of fact rather than a question. "And I belong to you. Always." He leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. Always. The final 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Geraldine finalized the plan, coordinating with Alara on logistics and with Silas on the financial side of the operation. Thalen continued his recovery, his body slowly returning to its peak condition under Reyes's careful supervision. And then, on the morning of the 6th week, Geraldine stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the safe house apartment, her gaze fixed on the Denver skyline below. The city was waking up, the streets filling with cars and pedestrians, the ordinary rhythms of life continuing without any awareness of the extraordinary events that were about to unfold. Thalen came to stand beside her, his reflection a grim companion in the glass. He was fully recovered, the bandages gone, and the scars the only remaining evidence of what he had endured. His tuxedo was replaced by tactical gear. It was dark clothing that would allow him to move through the shadows, the weapons he would need to complete his mission. "It's time," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Thalen gave a single, slow nod. The man who had been a soldier, then a strategist, then a protector, had now distilled into something else, an instrument of perfect, focused retribution. He was her Sanction. "Where do you want him?" Thalen asked, his voice quiet and final. A cruel, beautiful smile touched Geraldine's lips, but her eyes remained frozen. They were glacial frost replacing the warm amber that usually inhabited them. "I don't want him anywhere. I want him nowhere. Make the world emptier for him." She turned and walked to the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. 4 new bodyguards were waiting in the corridor. They were replacements for Thalen, professionals who would watch her back while he was engaged. She paused at the threshold, looking back at him one final time. "Come back to me," she said, her voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with orders and everything to do with the word that had been echoing in her heart for weeks. "Come back to me, Thalen." "Always," he replied. "Always." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Thalen alone with the silence of the penthouse and the weight of her will. He remained at the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the morning sun, innocent and unaware. In the reflection, his own face was a stranger's. It was calm, resolved, and utterly devoid of mercy. The response would not be a message. It would be an erasure. He picked up a single, burner phone from the table and made a call. It was the first step on a journey that would take him to Atlanta, to the heart of the O'Sullivan Empire, to the confrontation that would define the next chapter of his life. The hunter stepped into the night, and the world held its breath, waiting for the terrible, quiet sound of a Sanction falling. Into the dark. The flight to Atlanta was a study in calculated anonymity. Thalen traveled under a name that wasn't his, using documents that had been prepared months ago for exactly this kind of operation. He sat in coach, his frame folded into the narrow seat with the practiced patience of a man who had endured far worse accommodations. The other passengers saw nothing remarkable about him. He was just another businessman in a dark jacket, his face half hidden behind a tablet, his eyes scanning information that would have made them weep with terror. The dossier was burned into his memory by the time the plane touched down. Cale O'Sullivan's operation was a sprawling network of legitimate businesses and criminal enterprises, each one feeding into the next in a complex web that had taken years to build. The financial intelligence from Silas Rook had been particularly useful, revealing the hidden accounts and shell companies that O'Sullivan used to launder his money. But Thalen wasn't interested in the money. He was interested in the man. O'Sullivan's routine was established by the surveillance photos in Alara's dossier. He lived in a gated estate outside the city, surrounded by layers of security that would have made a small country jealous. He conducted his business from a downtown office tower, moving between meetings with the precision of a man who believed himself untouchable. The security chief, Liam O'Connell, was more accessible. He had a penthouse apartment in Midtown, a mistress in Buckhead, and a habit of visiting the same private club every Thursday night. He was arrogant, overconfident, and deeply convinced that his systems were impenetrable. Thalen smiled grimly at the thought. O'Connell had no idea what was coming for him. He checked into a no-name hotel near the airport, the kind of place where no one asked questions, and cash was still accepted. His room was small, functional, and completely anonymous. It was exactly what he needed. He laid out his equipment on the bed, checking each piece with the care of a man who knew that failure wasn't an option. A compact pistol, its serial number filed off. A knife, the blade honed to a razor's edge. A lockpick set. A small, specialized device that would disable electronic locks and security cameras, and a burner phone, pre-programmed with a single number. It was the number that would connect him to Geraldine if he needed to report back. He wasn't planning to report back. He was planning to complete the mission and return to her side. The weight of the Sanction lifted from his shoulders. But he had been in the field long enough to know that plans didn't always survive contact with the enemy. The first 3 days were reconnaissance. Thalen moved through Atlanta like a ghost, his presence invisible to the surveillance systems that O'Connell had so carefully installed. He had learned the art of moving unseen during his military service, honed it during his years as Geraldine's protector, and perfected it during the operations that had made him one of the most dangerous men in the country. He watched the downtown office tower, noting the patterns of the security guards and the gaps in their coverage. He observed O'Connell's penthouse, timing the rotation of the exterior cameras and identifying the blind spots in the building's perimeter. He tracked the security chief's movements, learning his habits and routines, memorizing the rhythm of his life. O'Connell was a creature of habit, which made him predictable. He left his office at precisely 6:15 each evening, taking the same route to his penthouse. He stopped at the same restaurant for dinner, sat at the same table, ordered the same wine. On Thursday nights, he visited the private club, staying until midnight and then returning home with the mistress who occupied an apartment 3 floors below his. The routine was a weakness, and Thalen had been trained to exploit weakness. He spent the 4th day preparing. His equipment was laid out, his route was planned, his exit strategy was mapped. Everything was ready, and yet, he found himself hesitating. It was the word that Geraldine had used. The word that echoed in his mind like a prayer and a curse. Belonging. She had said she belonged to him, and he to her. It was the anchor that had held him steady through the years of violence and uncertainty, the constant that had kept him human when everything else in his world had tried to strip that humanity away. He thought about her face, the arch of her cheekbones, the whiskey gold of her eyes, the cascade of chestnut hair that he had run his fingers through on the rare nights when they allowed themselves to be more than protector and protected. He thought about her voice, husky with emotion when the mask slipped, cold and commanding when they were in place. He thought about the way she had looked at him during recovery, her hand on his face, her lips whispering promises that were also warnings. "Go into the dark," she had said, "and remind them what we are." She was sending him to be a weapon, to be the instrument of her vengeance, the tool of her sanction, and he would do it. He would do it because he loved her, because she was his home, because the thought of anyone threatening her made something dark and primal stir in his chest. But he would also do it because it was the right thing to do. Because O'Sullivan had made a mistake, had challenged their power, had tried to take what was theirs. Because the world needed to understand that actions had consequences, and because, in the end, this was who he was. A man forged in violence, shaped by conflict, dedicated to a purpose that was larger than himself. He picked up the burner phone and stared at it. The number was programmed into the device, a single touch away from connection. He didn't call. He wasn't ready to hear her voice, wasn't ready to feel the pull of her presence when he needed to focus on the mission. He would call when it was done, when the sanction was complete, when he could return to her side and tell her that the threat was over. He put the phone down and reached for his equipment. The hunt was about to begin. The private club was a haven of old money and new secrets, its facade unremarkable, its interior a labyrinth of luxury. Thalen entered through a service entrance, bypassing the security cameras with a combination of timing and skill. He moved through the corridors like a shadow, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet, his senses alert for any sign of danger. O'Connell was in the back room, the private space reserved for the club's most exclusive members. Thalen could see him through the narrow window set into the door. He was a heavy-set man with a florid face and the arrogant posture of someone who had never been challenged. He was alone, nursing a glass of very expensive whiskey. The security chief was expected to meet with O'Sullivan's operations manager in an hour. That meeting was going to be significantly delayed. Thalen waited until O'Connell's attention was fixed on his phone, then moved. The door opened silently, oiled hinges and precision work ensuring that no sound would betray him. He was across the room in 3 strides, his hand clamping over O'Connell's mouth before the man could make a sound. The knife was already in his other hand, the blade pressed against the soft flesh of O'Connell's throat. "You're going to listen to me," Thalen said, his voice low and calm. "You're going to tell me everything I need to know, and then you're going to make a call." O'Connell's eyes were wide, his body tense with the primal fear of a man who suddenly understood that he was not the predator he had always believed himself to be. He nodded, a jerky motion that was almost comical in its desperation. Thalen loosened his grip, allowing the man to speak. "Who sent you?" O'Connell gasped. "Whoever it was, I can pay you more. Twice what they're paying. 3 times. I'm not here for money." Thalen pressed the blade a fraction of an inch deeper. "I'm here because you tried to kill someone who belongs to me." "Tried to kill?" O'Connell's eyes widened with understanding. "The gala. The Denver operation. That was you? You're the one who stopped the shooter. I'm the one who took the bullet meant for her. And I'm the one who's going to take your life if you don't give me what I need. I don't know who hired him. I don't. You arranged it." Thalen's voice was cold, utterly devoid of mercy. "You coordinated the operation, found the ghost, supplied the weapon. You did it because O'Sullivan wanted to send a message." "O'Sullivan didn't. Don't lie to me." The knife pressed deeper, a bead of blood welling at the tip. "I've been watching you for days. I know your routines, your habits, your weaknesses. I know about the mistress in Buckhead, the accounts in the Caymans, the meeting you're supposed to have in an hour. Do not test my patience." O'Connell was trembling now, the arrogance stripped away to reveal the coward beneath. "What do you want?" "O'Sullivan. I need to get to him. And you're going to help me." "Help you? He'll kill me. He'll kill you anyway." Thalen's voice was flat, clear and direct. "He'll figure out that you compromised the operation, and he'll make an example of you. But if you help me, I'll make sure you survive. I'll make sure you disappear, start a new life somewhere far from here. That's the deal. Take it or leave it." O'Connell stared at him for a long time, his eyes searching for any sign of deception. Thalen gave him nothing, his face as unreadable as stone. "The estate," O'Connell said at last. "He'll be at the estate tonight. There's a security briefing at 11, and he always stays afterward. Alone. He likes to review the day's reports without interruption. Security. 12 men on the perimeter. 6 inside the house. Motion sensors, cameras, the works. But there's a blind spot. There's a maintenance entrance on the east side. He doesn't know about it. It was sealed off during the renovation, and the cameras were never replaced." Thalen memorized the details, filing them away for later use. "You're going to call him. Tell him the meeting with Byrne is running late, that you'll be at the estate by 10. That should give him enough time to send the guards to their posts before we arrive." "I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't kill me." "I'm not going to kill you." Thalen withdrew the knife, stepping back from the trembling man. "But you're going to stay here until I'm done. If you try to warn him, if you try to run, if you do anything other than exactly what I told you, I'll find you. And next time, there won't be a conversation." O'Connell nodded frantically. "I understand. I understand. I won't do anything." Thalen watched him, assessing the truth of his words. The man was terrified, broken, utterly convinced that Thalen was capable of everything he had threatened. That was good. Terror was a powerful motivator. "Make the call," Thalen said. "And remember, you don't exist. You never saw me. You never spoke to me. If anyone asks, you were here alone, drinking your whiskey, waiting for your meeting." I was alone. I never saw anyone. Good boy." Thalen moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. He looked back at the trembling man, his expression unreadable. "The Denver operation," he said. "The ghost. Where did he come from?" "I don't." O'Connell swallowed hard. "There's a man. A fixer. He works out of the city. Supplies operators for jobs that need to be untraceable. He's the one who found the shooter, supplied the weapon, handled the logistics." "Name?"
Emmett.
"Emmett Clark. He runs a security firm as a front. Blackwood Security. Works out of an office in the tech district." Thalen nodded slowly.
Clark.
Another name to add to the list, another target to pursue. But that was a task for another day. Tonight, his focus was on O'Sullivan. "Stay here," he said. "I'll be in touch." He slipped out of the room, his footsteps silent on the carpet. Behind him, O'Connell collapsed into his chair, his hand pressed to his bleeding throat, his eyes wide with the aftermath of terror. Thalen didn't look back. He had a job to do, a sanction to deliver, and the night was just beginning. The O'Sullivan estate sprawled across 20 acres of prime Georgia real estate, its manicured lawns and tasteful architecture designed to project wealth without ostentation. Thalen approached from the east side, navigating the perimeter with the ease of a man who had done this 100 times before. The hunter stepped back into the night, and the world continued to hold its breath. The fortress is breached. The war is public. And the retaliation will be silent. Don't miss the explosive next chapter in the Belonging to Dangerous Women, the Empire Ascension saga. Where should Thalen strike first? Smash subscribe and turn on notifications to find out. The stakes have never been higher. Like if you held your breath during the gala scene. Subscribe for more dark romance, protective heroes, and alpha female leads who command empires. Comment below. What's more powerful, Thalen taking the bullet, or Geraldine giving the order to hunt? Catch up on the series before the sanction falls. Book 2, The Frozen Road to Her Empire. Book 3, The Dublin Accord. Book 4, The Aspen Fortitudes. Available now on my channel. Belonging to Dangerous Women Book 6, The Atlanta Acquisition. Coming soon.